Welcome to the WVU Football Sports Chat. I'm Todd Murray, along with our WVU football writer, Ed Owens. And Ed, this week the Mountaineers welcome in Kansas for homecoming. It's a situation you don't often see because you don't often see coaches fired this early in the season. But Kansas dismissed Charlie Weis. What do you make of this whole situation?
I think obviously Kansas wasn't happy with the program or the direction their program was headed, and they pulled the trigger. They made that move quickly. Like you said, it's very uncommon to see a coach fired 4 games into the season. Weis was 2-2. Earlier in the year, he had kind of pleaded. He said, "Give me September, and I'll give you a reason to come out in October and November." Not the case. Finishing 2-2 with a couple bad losses in there. The shutout loss to Texas cost Weis his job, and now they've promoted Clint Bowen to their defensive coordinator to interim head coach. One of the things we talked to the players and assistant coaches about this week was what to expect. Is that going to change what Kansas does? And pretty much across the board, they said no. Kansas is what it is. Their personnel isn't going to change. They know what to expect, and 1 week isn't a lot of time to overhaul an entire system. So Clint Bowen he said on the conference call earlier this week that he was going to maintain the play calling duties on the defensive side. Offensive coordinator John Reagan, who Kansas brought in from Rice, is going to handle the offensive side in Weis's absence, and I think that will really be where you might see any difference. We'll find out how much control Weis still had, even though Reagan was offensive coordinator. We'll see if they do anything differently there, but defensively, Kansas is going to be what we've seen for the first month.
Right, I guess offensively, if Kansas does anything fairly well, it's running the ball. They've got a mobile quarterback in Cozart, and what's WVU going to have to do defensively this week?
Yeah, running the ball is about the only thing that Kansas does do well. Charlie Weis was brought in because he was an offensive guru, and through his 2+ years, Kansas never really materialized on the offensive side. So moving the ball right now, they're number 4 in the conference on the ground with 193.5 yards per game, which is a pretty good clip, and WVU's coming off a performance against Oklahoma where they gave up 301 yards. Obviously 2 very different teams. I asked Dana about this earlier in the week, and what he had said was you can't compare what Oklahoma did to what Kansas is going to do in terms of their style of play, in terms of their personnel, in terms of their scheme, everything. He said they're very different teams. That said, WVU hasn't really been able to stop the run that well this year. You've got a guy like DeAndre Mann, who's number 4 in the conference for Kansas in rushing, averaging just about 75 yards a game. I think they're going to test WVU. They're going to make WVU prove that they can stop the run. Defensive coordinator Tony Gibson said this is a copycat league. He said if somebody else has success against you, another team's going to see that and try to do the same thing. I think Kansas is going to try to follow Oklahoma's blueprint.
Right. I know there were a lot of low points last year in the 4-8 season, but the lowest of the low might have come in Lawrence, Kansas, when they lost to Kansas 31-19. That sealed the fact that they'd be home for the holidays, end of the bowl streak. How much motivation is that going to be for the players Saturday?
I think a ton. You mentioned right there, it was sealed the losing season. It ended the bowl streak. I think a lot of guys, even this week, we're still talking about how much that loss still stings. They want to get that taste out of their mouth. Dana Holgorsen was asked this week why. What happened in that game that made you guys come out so flat? It's coming off last year's Texas game. They had no emotion. There was a hangover. Don't expect that this year. Dana was talking about how good Sunday's practice was. He said it was probably their best of the year. A lot of emotion, a lot of energy. Guys are really fired up for this, and they're fired up because of what happened last year and that poor performance against Kansas.
Right. I know a lot of people are calling this a must-win. I know that's a sensitive subject for a lot of people. What is your take on that?
Yeah, the company line going around the Pushkar Center this week was every game's a must-win, especially when it comes to conference play. They all count the same, and to that I would agree. That said, WVU was able to find positives in their loss against Oklahoma. They were able to come away with a few good things that they did and things to build on. If you lose to Kansas, there's no such thing as a good loss to Kansas. This is a bad team. This is a bad program. That's why they're still talking about last year's loss. It's something that really stuck with them. And if they drop this game this early in the season, I think that could have lasting repercussions for the rest of the year. Dana talked about a whole hangover from last year's Texas game, which affected the way they finished the year. If you lose this game to Kansas, I can't imagine what that hangover is going to be lasting through the rest of this season.
All right, we'll see how it all plays out Saturday at Milan Puskar Stadium. Ed, thanks for your time, and please continue to follow our WVU football coverage on thedpost.com.